What are we going to be talking about tonight? Well, the current state of youth basketball training, load management, and overuse injuries, why so many young athletes are burning out, the misinformation epidemic in sports training, social media trainers versus real development, what elite athletes actually do differently, why recovery is more important than most people realize, stories from athletes Brian has worked with, what parents need to understand about development today. Brian, man, first of all, thank you so much for taking your time to join us tonight. I know you stay busy and we really appreciate you coming on.
Happy to be here.
For the people who may not know your story, take us back a little bit. Talk about your background, where your passion for athlete development came from, and how Brooks Sports Performance originally started.
Okay. So going back to high school, I played kind of a variety of sports. I played soccer, I played basketball, I played football, I played golf. Um, really feel like I could have went and played college soccer, golf, and football. I chose the football route. Went to the University of Louisville back before most of these kids were probably born that I train now. And during my first year there, my appendix ruptured. I let it go for about 5 days, so I pretty much almost died. Um, Became massively septic. Long story short, had emergency surgery, lost 80 pounds during the process. By the time I recovered, coaching changed. I decided to leave the University of Louisville. After about a 2 year recovery of literally learning how to walk and put weight back on, and just, I lost everything I had, everything that I'd worked for. Went in the hospital, the best shape of my life, came out the worst shape of my life. Once I got my feet back on the ground, realized I still wanted to continue the football journey. At that point, U of L had switched coaches, so I decided to take a very odd route, and tried to go pro. Tried to go to the NFL. I'd never kicked in a college game, had zero stats, and kind of just worked my way through different camps and things like that. Was able to get a ranking of a top three free agent for 2 years running. Signed with a sports agency, ended up getting tryouts with over 18 NFL teams. So I kicked, so it was a little different. I'd be brought in for a couple days at a time. I'd be released. Long story short, by the time I finally got kind of where I needed to be, I ended up starting a family. Had twin girls born. Best thing that ever happened to me, but NFL life is not really conducive to family life sometimes. So hung my football cleats up and started training people. And that's kind of how it was born. Just seeing me go through the process. I had a great mentor. My high school coach played in the NFL. He was a strength coach for Miami of Florida. He was a strength coach for University of Louisville when Stellenberger was here. Um, he's the one that kind of pushed me to do this, and still super close to that guy today. And without him, I'm not here.
I think what's interesting about your story is like you've seen sports from so many different angles. You were talking about your high school. You never played college, but you try to you did the workouts for the pros. You've worked with the younger athletes just beginning their journey, like high school athletes chasing scholarships. I think Jordan Mitchell's one, Josh Lindsay, Boogie Cook. I think those are three.
Right.
College players trying to level up, and professionals trying to stay healthy and maximize the performance. How much has your perspective on training changed over the years from when you first started to compare to now?
Um, it's changed dramatically. Luckily, like I said, I had a great mentor who was probably couldn't do it in today's world. He'd probably get fired the first week. I mean, he was still to the point where he's leaving bars on our neck if we get stuck, and he's kind of kicking us and hitting us with mistakes and some crazy stuff. But I mean, it gave me the mentality that I needed. So he was always a work harder, work till you puke kind of guy. As I've evolved, I've realized it's not really work harder; it's just work smarter. Um, how can you balance your day? How can you balance your week to maximize it? I think going back when I was doing some consulting with the Charlotte Hornets, I had a player for them, and I was on a phone call with him, and he was asking about this specific player, and I was excited because the kid was deadlifting and squatting and super strong, and his first question was how does this big toe move? And I thought he was joking with me or some kind of candid camera moment, and he was like, I could give two shits how strong he is. How does his big toe flex? How's his foot mechanics? Because without that, he can't be successful. And that opened up a conversation to me of just things that you never think about. And, it turns out that, like with the basis of my training, big toe is the most important thing in an athlete's body. So if that toe can't function, ankle can't function, Achilles can't function, knee can't function, hips can't function, and it just goes up the chain. So just being fortunate enough to be around these guys at such a high level has really educated me. It's just been great.
So when you work with the athletes at those elite levels, the NBA players, the NFL players, the high college athletes, the Power Four, Power Fives, what are some things people misunderstand about how those actual athletes train?
I think the main thing
You know,
is
but
Well, I think the main thing is they're brilliant at the basics, and their ability to do the boring, monotonous stuff on a day-to-day basis is what separates them. So you see all these flashy clips of highlights of open runs and this and that. The truly best players in the world are able to go in the gym at 4 a.m. and get a 2-hour skill set workout, followed by a very stringent strength and conditioning session, and then they're back at night doing the same thing again. And it's just on repeat. And I think social media is great for some information, but it's also showing you a 20-second clip of a 60-minute workout that has no context to it. You have no clue why that's there, what that's there for, if that player played earlier that day, if they have a game coming up. So, like, for instance, you mentioned Jordan Mitchell. Like, we'll do with his schedule, if he has a game coming up or a practice, we'll do like an activation type workout. If he just finished playing, like say he just finished a 4-day tournament, we'll have a recovery based workout. If he has nothing for the next 2 or 3 days, that's when we're hitting it extremely hard and we're trying to get the highest volume, the highest load. So, I mean, internet's great as long as you know the context.
yeah, like you pointed out, the social media, they show all these like flashy drills, all these crazy workouts, but like you said, it's a 20 to 30 second clip out of supposedly an hour
Right.
workout. And you brought up a good point because people see these highlights of training online, but how much of elite performance is actually your reps, the consistency, which I always speak about, movement quality, recovery, discipline, and fundamental. Like, can you kind of hit those, like the consistency, the body of your reps, the discipline you have to have, and the fundamentals.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out, man. What was that last part?
Oh, you couldn't hear me?
Yeah, I heard a little
I
bit.
said, sorry. I I was talking about like how important like quality reps was,
Okay.
consistency, your discipline, and the fundamentals. Like, can you speak on those? Those keys.
It's huge. And I mean, I think where people I think it's funny because especially with trainers, basketball trainers, athletic trainers, all this, you get so concerned with people copying your workouts or whatever, and it's the dumbest thing in the world. You can have the same workout, two trainers cueing it, and it's two totally different results. It's about how much education how much physiology do you know, what adaptation are you trying to achieve with that specific movement. So it's hugely important. I think the other thing to remember is these flashy videos of like a vertec jump or a bench press or a squat. Never in a game are they going to pull out a vertec machine or a bench press or a squat and tell you to squat. So you're chasing numbers that I'm not going to say sometimes are irrelevant, but sometimes they don't translate. So your movement quality outweighs strength at any point.
Yeah, so you're a ton of athletes who had to go on to achieve stronger things. With name, everybody. Who are some former athletes that people might recognize? What has it been like watching these athletes grow over the years?
Um, so I mean, just my current. I mean, some of the people on my current roster right now, client wise. I've trained Ray Spalding since he's been 12 years old. Um, I did Jay Scrubs rehab for his ACL when he was with the Celtics, so he's been my guy since then. Sean East, who's blowing up in the G League and overseas. Trey Moses, who's a pro, he played at Ball State. He's overseas. He's a local guy. Grace Berger, who's in the WNBA, who's an amazing athlete. I had the privilege of training Rondell Moore before he tragically committed suicide. He was top tier player, top tier guy. And then locally, I got, without being that guy, I got the majority of the good high school kids around here. Like you said, Jordan Mitchell, Josh
I don't
Lindsay.
know if that could you cut out or what?
You here?
Are you still there? You were
Yep.
talking about Rondell Moore. I don't know why it's cutting out, but
Okay.
you were talking about
Um,
Rondell Moore,
yeah, I
and
had
you were the
Rondell
guy.
Moore, and then and then locally with the high school scene, I've got Jordan Mitchell, Josh Lindsay comes in, Boogie Cook, like you mentioned, Trey Hilrick, and a slew of other guys and girls.
Yeah, those are like the top. Well, at the top of the 2028 class.
For
And
me, like I take zero credit for any of these people's success. I mean, it's I try to not mess them up. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the disturbing things for me is a lot of these basketball trainers and a lot of these athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches take credit for the work that these kids are putting in. And I mean, your goal is to give them maybe 1% better and just don't mess them up. I know like when Ray got drafted, and it was a big deal, and I'm happy as heck for him. But people are congratulating me, and it's like he's 7 foot tall with a 7'5" wingspan. Like I didn't do a whole lot. I just didn't mess him up.
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they're the ones putting the work in. So, and they're the ones with the talent. You're just kind of
Right.
helping them guide them right. So, uh, you know, where do you think the athletes that you work with early on could have already tell where they are mentally? So, where the certain athletes you work with where they were early on, and could you already tell like they were different mentally?
Some, yes. Most, I think a lot of that's developed. I mean, a lot. Obviously the better athletes have a little dog in them that certain people don't. But it's the buy-in, and I think that's where like a coach or a skill trainer comes in significantly is getting that kid to buy in early on. If it's something they dread and they hate going to, they're probably not going to buy in, which means that mentality and that work ethic and that discipline's not going to develop. I'm a 40-something-year-old dad of five that listens to hardcore rap music probably 12 hours a day just so the kids that I train have a good facility and that they listen to the music they want to. And it's not, we try to keep things laid back so the buy-in is huge. They love coming here. So, it's easy to buy in when you love doing something.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that's with anything in life. So what separates those athletes? Because obviously you kind of said dog, but obviously your talent matters. But I've always believed that the mentality, consistency, coachability, and discipline matter just as much, if not more, long term than talent. Right?
I think it's 50-50. I mean, I think if you take a kid that has very little athleticism and you take a kid that's just unbelievably blessed, it's hard to catch up. And I think certain sports, it's a little easier to kind of even out. But I mean, if you have a 6'7" kid that's jumping 41 inches, he's probably going to be pretty good. He may not make it to the top, and I think each level you get to, it's more important. I think you can get away with it in middle school, high school. Once you get to college, you can kind of still get away with it. But once you get to that pro level where everybody's pretty equal and there's about a point 0.5 difference in everybody, that's when it really, truly, truly matters. With Jay Scrub, he's been fortunate enough to play with the Clippers, which was Kawhi and Paul George, the Celtics, which was Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. And, I asked him one day, what's the difference of him and Jason Tatum? And he was like, athleticism wise, I'm right there with him. It's just, he's better at working. He's better at getting in the gym consistently 2-3 times a day, and he just knows how to work. And, it's something he's working on and trying to catch up, but it's just, the difference is so slight at that level. It's crazy.
So what you're saying is the people sitting on the bench at the NBA, same athleticism as the starting five. It's just the starting five know how to work better, right?
That and opportunity. I mean, I think there's a lot of politics that go into it. I know there's a lot of politics that go into it. And, Rondell used to always talk about, there's three to five guys on every NFL practice team that should be starting, but they can't based on existing contracts. You can't have a guy making 15 million getting less catches than a guy making 650,000, or then the front office looks like idiots. So there's a lot of politics that go into it.
And I think that this is huge for the athletes listening right now because social media, Instagram, Facebook, all those have created this overnight success mindset, and everybody sees the final product, but they don't see, the years of sacrifice, repetition, recovery, the discipline, and the boring work, that got somebody to that point. Have there been athletes you work with that maybe weren't the most naturally gifted early on, but through consistency and work ethic became, high level guys?
100%. I have guys and girls both. There's a girl that I train that comes to mind, and I mean, she got cut from her high school volleyball team her sophomore year. Began training with me. We started, redoing some basics, redoing some strength stuff, getting her more athletic. Fast forward 2 years later, she's getting a college scholarship, and it's not by coincidence. It's her coming in to me 3 4 days a week. It's her going to a volleyball center every morning at 6 a.m. getting her reps in, and you can't teach work ethic, and it eventually, the old saying, hard work beats talent any day. True to an extent. Ideally you have both, but I think you're going to be capped if you're not willing to put in that work.
And that's one of my favorite things about sports, honestly. Sometimes the kid that develops correctly, stays healthy, and keeps improving slowly ends up passing everybody who peaks early. I've seen it with in basketball, seventh, eighth graders, they're the number one kid, they're the number one kid. And then the kid that keeps working, has that hunger, has that dog in him, slowly catches up and then passes them. So I see that in basketball a lot. Uh, you see that with your guys or,
Yeah, I
players?
think it's such a weird space right now. Everybody's so concerned about rankings, and I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, all these kids are going to go to a school. They're going to find a school that fits them. They're gonna be successful. Whether you're one, whether you're 20, whether you're 50, and I think when people realize there's a lot of politics that go into it. A lot of these AAU teams they have people on, I don't know, ESPN's board that's making these rankings. They may donate money. They may do this. There's just so much stuff that goes into it other than just playing. Um, and then I think the second thing is, you have people like Jordan and Josh and Boogie and all these guys and Trey that are unbelievably successful early on. And people forget, if you're a freshman, at least back when I played, like, if you're a good freshman, you may play some JV. If you're lucky, you may get to dress a varsity game. So, I mean, just because you're not starring your freshman year, you're not behind. You're right where you should be, And I mean, by sophomore year, you're hoping to play JV, and then by junior year, you're on varsity.
Yeah, speaking about the rankings, ESPN released rankings, I think yesterday. Then a couple of hours later, updated them, and just like mind boggling, like released and whatever. So that kind of maybe speaks onto the politics. Maybe somebody didn't like those numbers. I don't know, but
The phone
it's
call.
kind of weird for an outlet like ESPN to do something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So how much weight do those rankings really have at the end of the day?
Well, and I think you're,
Don't put it in school. Go to
and you're got certain, prep schools and AAU programs that bring massive money to certain cities, and they're not going to mess with those, and they're going to keep that machine going. And I hate to say it, but if you're not maybe from a known school, you're going to get knocked down.
you know, it's crazy. Another thing is like youth training today. We talked about it a little bit, before the show because honestly, I think it's becoming a major issue in sports today. Young athletes are trying to train like professionals before they've even mastered basics. So you see 13, 14, 15-year-old kids doing advanced jump programs. They're overload training, crazy recovery gadgets, weight plyometric, all this stuff that they online. From your perspective, what's going wrong with youth development now?
Um, I think just there's just a lack of knowledge. I mean, a lack of what needs to happen. So, like, what I do with any athlete is essentially a needs analysis. If you come to me, I look at what sport you play, what that sport demands, what that sport gives you. So the easiest way to look at it is like a bucket approach. So let's just take basketball, for example. If you have 6 buckets, what do you get on the basketball court? You get a ton of jumping, you get a ton of deacceleration, acceleration, you get sprinting, you get stopping and going, like I was saying. So those buckets are filled. So why am I going to sit here and do a bunch of plyometrics with a kid that's already done that for 2 hours, 3 hours that day? Because there's another 3 buckets on the other end that are empty. And then those empty buckets create an imbalance, which creates an environment for injury. So let's just take, from a physiology standpoint, like a hamstring. Hamstring connects behind, goes across your knee. It also connects at your hip. So what would be called your proximal hamstring, which is near your butt, takes the load for like acceleration, deacceleration, stop and going, all that stuff, driving a basketball. With basketball, most of your injuries occur at the distal point, which is achieved by like high level sprinting. So a basketball court being 94 feet, very rarely will an athlete get the opportunity to sprint, like full out without stopping and going. So we keep doing plyometrics and acceleration, deacceleration. All we're doing is just overloading that one hamstring while this other one over here sits empty, non-trained, and then that's the one that gets hurt. So that bucket's empty. So like when those players come to me, we're not jumping on boxes. We're not doing a bunch of, pointless agility ladder stuff, things like that. We're working on the empty buckets, if that makes sense. So it's like,
It does make
another
sense.
sport would be volleyball. Take a hitter for volleyball. If she or he is coming to me and they're an overhead athlete, why am I going to spend a ton of time using overhead technique stuff when they get that on the court? We're going to do the opposite. Or a better example would be like a baseball pitcher. They have rotation constantly. So instead of working more rotation and just constantly watering that plant, let's work anti-rotation to balance that out.
It does make sense when you think about it. But the scary part is like a lot of parents don't know what good training, what is bad training. If somebody has followers online, kids automatically think they know what they're doing, right?
Right.
Like, so people trust somebody just because they have followers on social media.
Right.
Trainers with the followers, people have the misconception or the conception of, hey, this person must know what they're doing. Let's go to them. Let's
Right.
use this person as our trainer because they have a lot of followers.
Right.
So, would you have any like you have anything to say about that? Like, just because you have a lot of followers doesn't mean you know what you're doing, correct?
Correct. More than likely, you don't. And I think the other thing is too, like from my perspective, just because you train a bunch of pro athletes doesn't mean you know what you're doing. Those guys are going to be good regardless. And I mean, I like to think that I give them a huge advantage. But if they go somewhere else, they're probably still pro athletes. Maybe not to the capacity, or they may not feel as good, or they may not be as strong as they are now. But I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for credentials. And I think everyone has their own opinion, but I think you know, experience and a degree is non-negotiable. Are there outliers that are very successful without those? Yes, but you're much more likely to get someone that's in tune with physiology, anatomy, biomechanics if they have an advanced certification or an advanced degree.
I think social media. My opinion is, I think social media has changed like athlete development. I don't know about forever, but now training almost becomes entertainment instead of actual development.
Yep.
Would you agree that a lot of athletes today are focusing more on looking like they train hard instead of actually improving?
Yeah, I think they just want something to post. I mean, I think you're in an age now where there's no more behind the scenes work. People want everyone to know that they're working out, and they want to know that they're working hard. I mean, it doesn't just, I mean, it exists with normal people, moms and dads posting their workouts. Like, I don't really understand it, but so it's definitely going to trickle down to the athletes. They want to be, I guess, patted on the back, and for some of these kids, higher level kids, it's important for them to be seen. They have potential NIL deals and things like that, and agencies that I know for a fact that on my pro side of athletes during a recovery process, agencies reach out to me, and I'm not going to say force me to post their athletes, but they want it posted to make sure that people know that their athletes training and that they're recovering and they're going to be fine for next season. So I think it's not a bad thing, if you use it for accountability and what it's used for. But when you're just trying to create like a circus act, for clicks and likes, it's just crazy. And I mean, the other thing is, I have, let's just say 25 exercises that I focus on. It's on repeat. It's going to get pretty boring if I post that every day. So I think if people just, the basics work, but unfortunately the basics aren't going to get likes and they're not going to get clicks. And you're not an edgy new age thinking trainer if you're just doing the basics, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like seeking external validation or what, but you see the kids place, a huge amount of stress on their body doing what you're saying. So some kids are stacking. They have school practice, AAU tournaments, individual workouts, then strength training, jump programs, extra conditioning, and camps and showcases. At what point does working harder actually become counterproductive?
Very quickly. I think, like, I'm not going to mention schools or names, but I had an individual in here just earlier, and they were having, for summer ball, they were having 2 2-hour practices today. So it's like there's 4 hours of practice.
Right.
You're coming to me. So what really happens, in actuality, I'm not going to say you're not getting better in practice, but you're getting better with skill set stuff. You're getting better with strength and conditioning. So if your team practice load is that high, it just limits what I can do. But like I tell all the parents, like what we do or what I try to advise everybody is a simple term, which is keep your high days high, your low days low. So what that means is, let's say I play for a school and we have practice Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The traditional parent is going to see Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday open. So I'm going to fill that with skill training, strength training, all that. In actuality, what you want to do is put it on the days that they have practice to open up those days of rest. So like my NBA guys lift immediately after the game. They don't do it because it's convenient. They don't do it because they want to. They do it because it frees up tomorrow morning or it frees up the next day. So whether you're playing basketball, whether you're lifting weights, whether you're doing conditioning, especially at a young age, it's a stressor to your body. Your body's not smart enough to realize what's going on. So you're going to have to recover. So you may as well just stack all of that and then get a 12, 18, 20-hour recovery without interruption, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So what you're saying is, or for the recovery is just important as working out, or if
100%.
not more, right?
100%. It's, if you can't
So
recover,
then, then we
it's
go.
taking your phone at 30% and hoping to make it through the day.
Okay, so then we get into load management and overuse. So load management has become like one of the most debated topics in basketball and mostly sports. Older generation you sometimes hear the phrase or instantly think that athletes are soft now, or but there's real science behind recovery and overuse. How important is load management specifically for the younger athletes?
Yeah, it's huge. And I think especially for the younger athletes, like if you take an individual that's not strong to start with, now they're starting their day off at 80% of what they were, and at 100%, they're already not strong. You're just opening up the door for massive injury. Load management at a higher level, generally, if you feel something in your body, a whisper is a scream. So if you feel a little something, it's not a coincidence. Something else is going wrong. So like, but and I keep talking about Jordan, but like Jordan, for instance, started having some calf problems this year. Played through the King of Bluegrass, and I think played a little bit after that. And then eventually, I worked very closely with a good friend of mine who's a PT at Pro Rehab, Eric McElroy, and I sent him to him, and he was, basically told Jordan, you're about 10, 12 jumps away from tearing your Achilles. And what was a minor little calf thing is not minor anymore if you don't recover. And I think people just ignore the signs and the symptoms too often. And I think when you look at like pro athletes with load management, they know their bodies better than anyone. They're working with extremely talented and smart, physiologists and exercise physiologists and doctors and trainers. They do it for a reason. It's not to get out of playing. It's because your body needs it.
So, what are some early warning signs that parents, coaches, and trainers should notice when a young athlete is physically overworked?
I think, and I don't mean this rudely, I think common sense. I mean, I think just, how long can you train 2 hours before school, have an after school practice, and then come to strength and conditioning? How many days can you make that happen, before something has to give? Because the other thing you have to realize is these young kids have to go to school. So they're in school all day also, which is exhausting. They're expected to do homework. So, by the time they get home, they eat, they relax. It's now 12 o'clock. They're getting up at 5. From an adult perspective, without working out, how long can you run off of 4.5 hours of sleep? And it's just, I think we think we're getting a leg up on the competition and we're working when other people aren't working, but we're really just, I mean, I hate to say it, sometimes we're just doing dumb stuff.
So it's just more detrimental to your development, just to your overall health, right?
And instead of a
So
positive adaptation, you're just getting a negative. And I mean, you know, I think a lot of, like Rondell, for instance, you know, he had a few injuries in the NFL, and you know he attributes a lot of it to the stuff that he used to do when he was young, which was dumb. And you know, we all do it. I used to do it. He did it. And I mean, you know, you do too many sets, you do too much weight, you do too many workouts, and it may not affect you when you're 16, 18, 20, but some of these people's shelf life is going to be a lot longer than others. So if you're going on to college and pros, that's when some of that stuff may pop up.
so I guess I want to get over to, like, do you think the basketball culture has normalized like the year-round competition too much with high school AAU camps, events? It's a year-round sport thing because now kids are basically playing their 12 months a year without really not recovering.
Right.
Do you think that there's is too much competing around? Is you think it's too much on an athlete, a younger athlete?
Yes. Not even close. And I mean, because like you said, it's not, once you get in that scene, it's very hard to improve because there's no, you know, so like a perfect ideal training cycle is going to be broken down over a whole year. And then you're going to break that major cycle down into months. And then you're going to break those months down into weeks of what we're trying to accomplish. Well, if I'm in a competition based protocol year round, I can't do what I need to strength and conditioning wise. So let's take U of L football team. They're training different preseason than they are during the season. They're training postseason different than they are preseason. And then off season is where they're truly getting strong, bigger, stronger, faster, all that stuff. With these kids nowadays, there's no off season. And it's just, you almost have to pick what's more important, your school season or your AAU season. And the other thing that gets tricky is nobody cares. You know, it's different organizations. So like right now, all the high school kids I train are getting ready to go into a lull with AAU, but it's been they had a tournament this weekend. They start June ball today, so they'll run
Yep.
that. They'll run that for a month, and then they'll get a day off, and then that next weekend will be the next AAU tournament. And there's no time to get better. And I think if you took two kids identically skill level, and one of them skipped AAU and did nothing but skill train, strength and conditioning train, and the other one played AAU, it's not even close. And I think, you know, nobody's going to do it because we think we're falling behind or we're not going to get the exposure. But I think, you know, I think Tyron Stokes took off this AAU season last season, and I mean, I don't think it really hurt him. And I understand he's a different talent, but I think that's across the board.
Yeah, no wonder why we see like so many ACL injuries, stress fractures, tendon issues, and I think the biggest issue is burnout at like the younger ages than like ever before, right?
Well,
Burnout.
you got to
A lot of
think
these kids are
too.
getting burnt out.
Well, and you got to think too, like, you know, it's not, we have more injuries now, and I mean, it's I'm not gonna say it's common sense, but the reason is because we used to play opposite sports. So I mean, like the muscles get used during basketball aren't used during soccer. The muscles getting used in soccer aren't used during volleyball. So you naturally gave yourself active rest from your sport without even knowing it by playing different sports. Now, take a baseball player or take a volleyball player or whatever. You're using the exact same muscles, the exact same protocol every day. And I mean, your body can't do that. Your joints wear out, your tendons wear out, and you can't recover.
So playing basketball and football back in the day is better than playing basketball all year round because, like you said, you're going to work those different muscle groups and you don't even know what you're doing, but you're going to develop more if you play two different sports than that one sport year round.
Yep. And I
Is
think,
that
you know,
what? Yeah, right.
and I think, you know, most of your very good athletes today are still on the verge. I think a lot of them still play two, three sports. And then once they realize, hey, I'm good at basketball or I'm better at football, then we specialize. But I think you're coming up on a generation, which will be the first generation of athletes to, that's all they play is basketball. Or that's all they play is baseball. You know, I think, you know, LeBron played football in high school. You know, I think kids, even some of my sophomores, juniors that are in high school, they still play other sports. But I think like this middle school group coming up will be your first generation of just that's all I do is football, or that's all I do is volleyball or basketball or whatever.
Yeah, I think at that age, they're, I guess, guided or, hey, you like this sport more, you're better at this sport, let's work more on this sport. But at the end, it's detrimental to your, physical development, is what you're saying. And I want to kind of get over to, I don't want to say bad trainers, but maybe like misinformation.
Right.
And it's probably like one of the biggest topics right now. There's so many trainers online today with, like I said, massive followings, but some of them have little to no understanding of, biomechanics,
Right.
movement quality, progression, or injury prevention. How dangerous is misinformation in athlete development right now?
It's at an all-time high, I would say. I don't know the reason behind it, but I think trainers in particular, whether it be basketball trainers, whether it be strength and conditioning, it's one of the few jobs in the world that people treat it as just a side hustle, and it's just like, oh, I think I'll train some people. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't wake up tomorrow and think I'm going to go build decks or change oil in cars because I don't know how to do it. You know what I mean? But it's just like, and for the people that do know it, it's so easy to spot. And I'm not picking on people by any means. And there's a basketball trainer who used to be here, and he has a pretty big following, and he's moved away, so I can talk about him. But and he's doing some skill set work, and he's got a wedge strategically placed under a toe, and I understand what he's trying to do. The problem is the wedge is in the wrong spot, so he's not getting it. And I mean, it's great that he's thinking outside the box, but then again, you're a basketball trainer. You're not supposed to know physiology. You're not doing that. So it's great that you're thinking outside the box, but reach out to people that know. There's a reason that I do no skill training. I do nothing on the court because I don't know it. I don't want to know it. So it's like, I keep using him as a reference, but Jordan's a great example. Like, I do his strength and conditioning. His dad, Carlos, who played overseas, he played in college, never comes in my gym to tell me what to do. And guess what? I never come in the basketball gym to tell him what to do when he's training. We stay in our lanes, and guess what? Good things happen.
Yeah. And, sometimes the drill that they look the craziest online actually
It's
have the least
yeah.
basketball value. How much damage do you think social media has done to people that think good training looks like? They see something online, they think, "Oh, that's great training," and are they just wasting time? Or are they injuring themselves, or just?
Um, I don't know if they're, you're going to get something. I think you're going to, as long as you're not just doing anything crazy. I mean, you're not, probably not going to get hurt necessarily, but you're just not getting benefit. So you're just spinning your wheels. And the work smarter thing is huge because it goes back to the recovery. So if I can work smarter and I can limit my training, I think if you talk to NBA athletes, their goal is to do the least amount possible to get the highest results. Um, the least amount possible means you're doing the least amount of damage to your body. It opens up the door for more recovery, more sleep, more nutrition, more stuff like that. Um, but like you said, I think dribbling six basketballs and juggling tennis balls and putting something on top of your head is just kind of ridiculous when you look at somebody like Steph Curry or Klay Thompson who's putting up 50 points on 7 dribbles.
Yeah, just, I guess, be the most efficient as you can at whatever you do, like your training. But how can a parent or coach like identify somebody that's actually qualified to train their child or player?
I think first you got to recognize what you want for your kid. What are you trying to get? And I don't do speed training because I don't do it. I have a good friend of mine who I reach out to, Justin Green, who when I need him, I'll send kids to him. But I think the easiest thing, like I said, is do some due diligence. And I think when you walk in a facility and you see an individual training 10 or 12 kids at once and they're all doing the same workout, somebody's getting screwed. And it's kind of like a boot camp for adults. If it's geared for the person that's never worked out, then the person that's in shape is getting the short end of the stick. If it's geared towards people that are super in shape and the person's never worked out, then they're in the back throwing up. So I'm not saying that everything has to be perfectly individualized, but it needs to fit your child's needs. So I think, like, for me, sports in general, like, there's a 60, 70%, everybody needs it. So I don't care if you play baseball, volleyball, basketball, football, it's never going to not benefit you by being stronger, faster, moving laterally better. Then from there, like I said earlier, you do a little needs analysis. So what is this person's history? Are they prone to knee problems? Do they have lower back pain? And then you try to address that issue. And then you look at the sport and what are the common injuries of that sport? And then we try to circle back to that and try to prevent some of that. I mean, you're never going to prevent injuries totally, but just try to identify some things that you can do with that individual that actually pertain to that individual versus just a blanket approach of one size fits all. I'm going to run 20 kids through at $15 an hour. And I don't mean that rudely. There's some people that are overpriced, but if you're getting workouts for $10, $12, there's there's probably a red flag there.
So, what are some other major red flags that parents and coaches should immediately pay attention to?
Um, Unfortunately, I think it's tough for parents because a lot of parents come in and watch and they don't know what to look for. But like I said, I think the biggest glaring issue is if you have a slew of kids in and they're all doing the same stuff. If now don't get me wrong, I may have had 15 kids in today. Out of those 15 kids, there may be 20 exercises repeated, but at some point, based on size, needs, sport, we get individual. We get specialized into that sport or what they need.
Yeah, and I think that's important because I think some trainers are building like content creators instead of building athletes. And what actually translates to performance? Like I said, we've seen those crazy cone drills. We've seen the balancing and all that unstable surfaces, the tennis ball reaction drills, or doing 5 or 6 different things at once. I mean, it's going to get views online. How much of that actually translates to real game performance?
Probably not much. I think like an athlete walks in with us. The first thing we start with, like I said, we start with balance. We start with big toe, what's called small foot mechanics, and then we build up. And then from there, it's pretty. I'm not gonna say it's basic, but it is pretty basic. You have 3 planes of motion. You have the sagittal plane, which is forward and backwards. You have the frontal plane, which is kind of left to right, and then you have a transverse plane, which is like your 3-dimensional rotational stuff. So your athletes need to hit every one of those planes of motion throughout a workout. And then from there, you have your actual motion. So you have what's called like a horizontal press, a horizontal row. So a horizontal press would be a bench press. Horizontal row would be a dumbbell row, a barbell row. You have the same thing vertical. And then you have squat, you have lunge, you have hinge patterns, things like that. So essentially, you have a blueprint for all these athletes of what needs to happen. So like, say you go to the gym, you'll have a chest day, you'll have an arm day, you'll have a leg day. With athletes, we're training movements, we're not training muscles. So we're training patterns. So I'm trying to get that athlete familiar with all those patterns. If they come to the gym 3 days a week and I'm doing just a leg day, just an arm day, just a back day, let's say, I'm not training those patterns enough to where it gets downloaded up here. So like I said, every day my athletes come in, we have a different point of emphasis, but we're hitting every one of those movement patterns. Now, what was A on Tuesday may be my C on Thursday and vice versa. But every day we have an emphasis, a point of emphasis of what we're trying to accomplish. And then we're trying to hit, like I said, every one of those planes of motions and movement patterns.
So I think you basically hit it when you're training your guys or athletes. What are the core things that truly matter the most?
Just like I said, those things. I mean, what I think the biggest thing that we're missing is you're trying to upload in here a library of movement patterns. So when they're in competition, they're in sport, it's just reactive. So whether it's basketball, whether it's baseball, whatever, you don't have time to think. It's recognize a pattern and move. So, the way it's going to work, brain shoots signal down spinal cord shoots it out to muscle goes to tendon moves bone. And without this extensive library, now we have to consciously think, okay, I need to move this. By the time we think, it's too late. So outside of basketball, take a baseball player. They don't have time to think about a pitch. They recognize patterns, so they'll see 2 fingers on a ball, or I don't know baseball like that, but they'll see the wrist turned to the left, or the elbows higher than lower. So they got a good idea of what ball is coming out. So they've recognized that pattern because they have it downloaded. So Another example would be take two 4-3-40 guys. If one has loaded their software up here with all these patterns and all this stuff, they just act instinctually. So now that 4-3 guy is a 4-2 guy. The 4-3 guy with no library of movements is now a 4-5 guy, if that makes sense.
It really does make sense. What are some of the most underrated things that a young player can do or should prioritize if they generally want long term success?
Just a balance. I think when I say balance, it can mean a lot of things, but a balance between workload recovery, a balance between strength and conditioning and basketball. Even me, I'm in the strength and conditioning field, but if you're a basketball player, basketball needs to eat first because that is your main thing. So if you have opportunity to go skill train or get strength and conditioning in and you can only get one, go to the basketball court because that is the point of emphasis. And then the other thing is just making sure, a big mistake is a lot of people train bilaterally, meaning like our feet are squared off. In sport, you're never bilateral, you're unilateral constantly. So everything you do from an athlete perspective should be unilateral, meaning like single leg, or say I'm doing an overhead press, legs should be split so I can get on that back big toe, which is similar to like a jumping pattern. And it sounds crazy. The other thing is get out of your shoes. Shoes confine those feet and don't allow your toes to work. So like NBA guys, you should be able to take your shoes off. Every toe should be able to lift off the ground just like a finger. And if they can't function like that, that's your tires. So if your tires can't grip the road, aka the basketball court, I can't exert force, which means I can't produce force, which means I can't jump, I can't sprint, I can't move quickly. So I think feet, it sounds
Wow.
training your feet, training your big toe, getting out of your shoes, all that stuff is hugely important. And I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's so important. So like, if you go and look at the stuff I do, even if we're doing an overhead shoulder press, we're trying to connect lower body to upper body. And then in addition to that, we're trying to get as much flexion and extension in that big toe as we can. The more effective that big toe is, the more force we can produce. So you see kids a lot of times like, they want to get faster, or they want to jump, higher or further or whatever. You have to upgrade the engine, which is your muscles and tendons. So like you can jump, and that's why I hate like jumping workouts or Vertimaxes or all these. It's just crap to me. Um, you can floor a Honda Civic as much as you want. It's only going to go a certain speed until you upgrade that engine. So until we upgrade the engine, aka the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, we're not going to jump faster. We're not going to run faster. And it's not, these kids aren't jumping higher because they're not jumping enough. They're jumping too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one thing I think people overlook is movement efficiency, right? So elite athletes make things look so easy because their bodies are moving efficiently, not because they're always doing the hardest workouts possible. So the movement efficiency. So what I was saying is like NBA guys, elite athletes, they make things look easier than they really are because their bodies are moving more efficiently, not because they're doing the hardest workouts possible, right?
No, they're just more efficient. There's no leaks. So, I mean, if you have leaks in your movement patterns, that's going to exert more energy. More energy exerted, you're going to be more tired. You're going to be more injury prone. It's it's very complicated, but it's actually at the end of the day, it's very simple. I mean, it doesn't cover all the bases, but if you're on a road trip and you're going 75 and smooth the whole way, you're going to be a lot more efficient than if I'm flooring the gas pedal, I'm hitting the brakes, I'm flooring the gas pedal, I'm hitting the brakes, because I have a constant leak of energy out. Same deal with athletics, same deal with sprinting, moving, all that stuff. And it goes back to how extensive is your library up here affects how extensive we move. And I mean, it affects how efficiently we move, rather.
So on to recovery, injury prevention, and longevity. It seems like injuries are becoming more and more common with like in youth sports. Why do you think we're seeing injuries happen at younger ages than ever before?
I think it goes back to the year-round thing. Um, just the year-round thing. I think the other thing is there's just, I don't mean this rudely. There's more people coaching that maybe shouldn't be coaching. Um, and then the other thing is a lot of times there's no metric to go by. So like, I'm not picking on people or organizations, but there's a particular volleyball organization, there's a particular maybe cheerleading organization, and it's just practice until you get it, and that just doesn't work. You have to have some level of some metric to go off of. So, and it doesn't matter if it's reps, it doesn't matter if it's time, it doesn't matter if it's how many shots you put up. But like, let's take Trey from Mayo, who I'm helping through his ACL. He started running this week, and it's not fast. It doesn't matter. But like I was telling him, set a timer, or measure the distance, or whatever you want to do, and at least get a metric. And then if you wake up tomorrow and you're too messed up, we know that we need to lower that. If you feel good, then we can tinker it up. But if you have no unit of measurement, you're screwed. So, it's like an Apple Watch or a scale. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. I hate to say it, but as long as it's consistent, at least you have something to go off of. And I think it's just overtraining. And I mean, when I was growing up, I never knew anyone in high school that had ACL surgery or Achilles surgery or any of that. And I mean, there's one particular team that, or organization, I guess I should say, that, I've had 3 girls under the age of 16 that all tore their Achilles. Well, that doesn't happen by chance. It's something wrong in the base of the program.
Yeah. Yeah. Growing up, I didn't see very many ACLs or anything like that. But as far as recovery, can you talk about how important sleep, nutrition, hydration, mobility work, and recovery compared to actually workouts?
It's huge. And I mean, I can't emphasize enough, and plug my phone in. If your recovery is good, if your recovery isn't good, your workouts can't be good because you have nothing to go off of. And that's why the high day, low day thing makes sense, is it gives you a chance to recover. So like I was saying, if you spread everything out over the whole week, and every 12 hours you're interrupting that recovery, your body's trying to get back to its homeostasis. It can't get back there. It can't recover because it's like going to sleep. If I can sleep 8 hours consistent, I feel great in the morning. Now, go sleep 8 hours, but set an alarm clock for every 45 minutes to wake you up. You're going to feel like crap in the morning. And that's kind of what we're doing with training by putting something every single day. And, I think as parents or even athletes, when we see a gap in our schedule, it makes us anxious, it makes us nervous, or we think like we're not working hard enough, when the actuality is just rest. You should have, I tell all the parents that I work with, your kid needs at least one 24-hour reset of nothing. So the minute they put a basketball down or a weight down or whatever, you got 24 hours of nothing. And then they need one day, if possible, of just something light, whether it's just getting up shots, whether it's just a light run, whether it's whatever it is. So, one day of total rest, one day of active rest, that's your ideal situation. And I think we get in a bad habit of seeing these kids be 6'9", 6'8", dunking or jumping like Josh. They're 15-year-old kids. Their nutrition usually is Chick-fil-A or at best Chick-fil-A. Their sleep is crap. And, they don't recover as well as a 28-year-old who has high testosterone levels. And, the other thing that people fail to realize, you can't train like a pro because you don't have the nutrition, you don't have the recovery, and you don't have the outside supplements that these guys are doing. So, there's a lot more that goes into it. At best, a high school kid has a pair of Normatec boots, which don't do a whole lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know you're not. I want to talk a little bit about nutrition. Like you said, Chick-fil-A or whatever. I know you're into like the training. I just wanted you to kind of maybe talk a little bit about how important nutrition really is to a kid that's trying to play college sports or play professionally.
It's huge, and I think it's not nutrition in the sense of we have to diet. It's more Most of my athletes, I just try to give them minimums, meaning you got to eat X amount of times a day, or you got to eat X amount of just have minimums for it. Anything over that is great. They're burning enough calories to where the concern is not eating too much; it's eating too little. Um, and that's your fuel. I mean, if you don't, between nutrition and electrolytes, especially playing 6, 7 games a weekend in these hot gyms, it's huge. And it's again, it's not. It puts them in even a worse spot during school because a lot of them aren't eating lunch. Most of them wake up late. They're skipping breakfast, so now they're going to their basketball workout at 3 o'clock with, at best, a candy bar or a protein bar, and then wondering why they feel like crap.
Yeah, and I think a lot of young athletes focus on the training and really nothing on recovery, but recovery is training, right?
Right.
And what are some simple things that the athletes can start doing immediately to better protect their bodies and improve their performance long term?
I think one of the biggest things is developing your own program, um, your own routine. So, your own pregame routine, which is geared towards you. Like I said earlier, Jordan was having some issues with his calf, his Achilles. So, I mean, before every AAU game, he has an activation workout that he does for his calf. And it's not static stretching like the old school lean down, touch your toes. It's something to make sure that those muscles are firing and everything around it is firing. And then I think, like I said, just developing your own what works for you. I think what works for him is not going to work for somebody else. So, you don't have to have a trainer 24/7. You can get someone, do a consultation, they can write some stuff out for you, and you can go on your own. But the important thing is to have something that works for you. I hate to be this guy, everything's team oriented, but at the end of the day, if you have 12 players, there's 12 different needs on that team. And if you're relying on a one size fits all approach or a blanket approach, you're going to be, probably in for a rude awakening.
What's one piece of advice you could give to the young kids watching athletes trying to reach the next level? Like, what would it be? One piece of advice.
Just fall in love with the process. Um, the basics, the basics that were around in the 1970s still work. Obviously there's been some research and some updated things, but I think especially like a basketball standpoint, athletes are way better now. They're way better athletes, but it might be hard to argue that they're significantly better basketball players because the basics still work. And I think you hear these things on Kobe Bryant and LeBron, all these guys, but the one thing that is consistent across the board is anyone that watches their workouts are just absurdly surprised at just how basic they are. And I think most people, parents, and players think that each level they get to, there's just going to be this magic door of exercises that opens up. And then I think that's the cool thing about, like what we do is I'll have high school kids mixed in with pro guys or even middle school kids mixed in with pro guys at times. And they see those pro guys are doing the same exercises they are. They just do them at a much higher level, a much higher velocity, much more weight, things like that. So it's just fall in love with the process. And, it sounds corny, but just be thankful that you're in a position to play a sport, and just enjoy it. I think we lose sight a lot of times of very few of us are going to go pro, and it's a harsh reality. But what sports is supposed to do is build discipline. Fill your day with something to do, and bring a lot of different groups and classes of people together that wouldn't be normally together.
Exactly. So, what kind of advice would you give to parents that are, trying to navigate all this noise in today's basketball world?
Um, it sounds awful, but don't live through your kid. Let your kid live their life. Make sure your kid wants to do it. I can tell you right now, like if I have kids that I'm training and they don't want to be here, I can tell it within 3 minutes. And from experience, I grew up playing travel soccer, and I got to the point where I just absolutely hated it. And I mean, we traveled the country and we travel every weekend, and in a very non-arrogant way, I was very good at what I did. But it got to the point where I just hated it, and I have other athletes that I've trained in here that play certain sports and they hate it. And it's just because of parents they're doing it. And I mean, there's nothing worse than going to a practice or games or tournaments when you just despise the sport. So I think, just make sure your kid still enjoys it and realize like what we're trying to get out of this. We're not, like I said, what, I don't know the percentage, 0.03 are going to go pro. And I mean, it's going to end at some point for everybody. So what you're trying to get out of it is discipline. You're trying to get around good people. You're trying to make connects. You're trying to just be a better person through playing sports and just take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, amen. One thing before we let you go, what's next for Brooks Sports Performance, and where can people, follow your work or connect with you?
Uh, so I need to do more. I don't do a whole lot on Instagram, but I'm at Brooks Sports Performance on Instagram, Brian Brooks. I think the next thing for us will be very soon opening a facility that's kind of a one-stop shop, meeting like skill training, strength conditioning, recovery. I think this is Louisville is a weird place in terms of its size, and there's not a one-stop shop. I think for massage you're going over here, for cryotherapy or red light you're going over here, for strength and conditioning you're going over here, you're going to this gym. So the next step will be opening a place that has rehab. It has strength and conditioning. It has return to play protocol. It'll have physical therapists. It'll have me. It'll have skill trainers, things like that. Um, and the second thing, which is in the works, is possibly bringing a new AAU program to Louisville, sponsored by a pretty big athlete. We'll see if it turns out, but the first thing for sure. Second thing is kind of a in addition.
Awesome. You have a website? You have anything anywhere else people can connect with you? Just Instagram?
Yep, I suck. That's all I have. That's all I have.
Now you don't suck, man. You're doing well. This has been like incredible conversation. I've learned a lot. Hopefully, the people watching have learned a lot, and took a lot out of the conversation. Just a huge thank you for coming on. It's Brian Brooks at Brooks Sports Performance. Just thank you for joining us tonight on the Pure Prospects podcast. This has been one of those conversations where athletes, parents, coaches, even trainers really need to hear, because there's so much misinformation out there right now. Guys, make sure you follow Brian on Brooks Performance Training over on Instagram, right?
Yep.
And he's for athlete development and training content. What does Brooks Sports Performance offer?
So we do strength and conditioning. We also do return to play protocol, which is, for those that don't know, the way it should work is athlete gets injured, they go to physical therapy. The traditional model is they finish their physical therapy and then they go play sport. The risk for re-injury there is massive, because you stop playing, you go through physical therapy, and then you're introduced to these high force, angles and just chaos. So return to play kind of bridges that gap. So like the individual I work with that owns Pro Rehab, basically the way it would work is, say you're injured, you go through your surgery or your healing process. Your first 3 weeks, you're with him 100%. I start coming in at 10%. Week 5, it's 80-20. It gets to 50-50. And then before you know it, I'm at a 90%. The physical therapist is at 10%. And then what that does is the minute you're cleared, you're ready to go. We bridge the gap of essentially exposing you to angles that you're going to see on the court. So you're able at that clearance date to actually play versus just start practicing again. So like your traditional model, you'd go through therapy for, say, let's just say 3 months, and then you'll return to practice for a month to try to get jumping exposure back, joint angles, things like that. Return to play kind of combines the two. So when your clearance date arrives, you're truly cleared to play. So that's one thing that we're getting big into. It's kind of a non-existent in the city. And then the other thing we also do, we do customized nutrition, we do supplement protocol, recovery protocol, things like that.
Awesome. Like I said, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on. For everybody out there listening and watching, make sure you follow Brian over on Instagram. Follow us over here on Substack, Pure Prospects. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Subscribe and like our YouTube channel. And like I said, follow us on all social media platforms. I'm Cody Thomas on the Pure Prospects podcast. We'll catch you on the next episode. See you later, Brian.
Appreciate you.
Yes,